Greetings of the day. I'm Poornima bearing roll number 28029. Today I'm here to discuss about an article implications of COVID-19 for labor and employment in India. Coming to about the author, Miss Dagmar Walter, a Swedish national, was appointed as a director of the ILO Decent Work Technical Support Team for South Asia and Country Office for India as of 22 February 2018, and she was a deputy director of the ILO Decent Work Team and the Office for the Caribbean from July 2014. Coming to the overview of an article, the COVID-19 pandemic has pushed the world into an unprecedented crisis and uncertainty, calling to expedite the implication of the Century Declaration. It called upon constitutions to pursue with the regulatory vigor its constitutional mandate for social justice by further developing its human-centered approach to the future of the work, and it is also called for putting workers right and the needs, aspirations and right of all people at the heart of the economic, social and environmental policies. And the national community of the ILO constitutions have engaged in a collective endeavor to tackle the devastating human impact of the pandemic, but it is more needed. Coming to the introduction of an article, in July 2019, the ILO adopted the Century Declaration for the Future of Work with support from its 187 member state, and the declaration called upon Constitution to pursue with the unrelieving vigor its ILO for social justice by further developing its human-centered approach to the future of the work. And 1 year of the COVID-19 has pushed the world into an unprecedented crisis and uncertainty, calling to express the implication of the certainty declaration. And also, the international community and ILO's constitutions have engaged in a collective endeavor to tackle the devastating human impact of the pandemic, but it is more needed. Coming to the discussion, for the first one is a relieving impact. The ILO was quick to recognize that the COVID-19 pandemic is not just a health crisis but equally an economic and labor market crisis. The lockdown measures adopted in most countries to prevent the spread of the pandemic restricted economic activities. Eventually, developing countries have faced the distribution in trade and supply chains and negative growth. As early as 18th March 2000, ILO first monitor on COVID-19 has estimated a rise in unemployment and underemployment between nearly 5.3 million and 24.7 million. This is the high scenario from a basic level of nearly 188 million in 2019. And also the working hour losses could range between 140 million full-time jobs and 340 million full-time jobs in the last quarter of the year, depending upon the spread of the pandemic. And nearly 93% of the world's workers are still living in the countries with some restrictions in place, and 1/5 in countries where closure affect the essential workers. And the lockdown combined with the global headwinds delivered in a severe blow to the economy. And in the year to 2020, the IMF estimates the GDP growth of the nearly just 1.9% for the country, the lowest rate since the 1991 balance of the payment crisis. And India does not have the labor force data covered the period quarter 4th 2019 and the second quarter 2020 second quarter 2020. And the COVID-19 has exposed the vulnerability of urban casual workers. Many of workers who migrate, it is difficult to figure the number of migrants who lost the jobs and accommodation during the pandemic and return home. The and the return home. And the next one is the ILO's policy framework and support from the Indian country office. And in this, the ILO is helping countries to develop a response framework and leading the knowledge assessment process. The organization was quickly to identify the priorities specific to nations and sectors, and it reiterates the need of building confidence through trust the dialogue to make policy measures effective. And ILO's equities and inclusive response address four main areas. They are protecting workers in the workplace, stimulating economic and labor demand, and the supporting employment and incomes, and using social dialogue between government, workers, and employment to find the solution. And also ILO is the lead agency in the United Nations country team for the results are skilling and entrepreneurship and the job creation. In April ILO bipartite dialogue on MSME recovery and revitalization and helping in shaping UN policy advice in designing relief measures for the sector. And coming to the way forward, the Indian government has gradually relaxed the lockdown, and at the end of the writing, July 2020, most economic activities are slowly resuming an immediate support measure during the lockdown. The Indian government had prioritized a package of US dollars 25 billion, around 0.8% of the GDP, while demanding sufficient protection for the workers from all sectors. The terms of the exposure to the virus and the incomes or working conditions. ILO, and also ILO calls for setting a strategy for the medium and longer term to address the declining demand and speedy up the recovery. And also COVID-19 reminds the world why international institutions like the ILO were creating in the first place. And the ILO Century Declaration on the Future Work. This is the discussion. Coming to the results, the labor market recovery during the second half of the 2020 was certain, and it is incomplete. And also it is helping countries in demand a response framework. And also there is a future 13.7 in a regular but unprotected jobs. And also while applying 2020 UN population estimate to above proportion, and also it suggests that between 364 and 473 million workers are at risk of being adversely affect the lockdown. And also the 93% of the world's workers are still living in the countries with some restrictions in place, and 1/5 are countries are with closure effect but are still essential workers. Coming to the learnings, ILO's first monitor and COVID-19 has estimated a rise in the unemployment and underemployment between 5.3 million and 24.7 million from a base level of nearly 188 million in 2019. And women's labor participation numbers were declining even before the pandemic with increasing engagement, and women in education with domestic duties are being classified at work. And India does not have a labor force data covering the period for quarter 2019 to quarter second 2020. And in most urban units, the jobs are linked with the accommodation at workplace, and underemployment may have forced these workers to vacate their shelters as well. And the ILO response policy framework is keeping international labor standards at its base. In guidelines, member countries to prioritize health protection measures for all economic support for both the demand and the supply side. And we can only build back better if our efforts are based on the principles of social justice and solidarity that two can leave one behind. Thank you.